Donald Trump has a legal problem to get a fair vote, but he also has a political problem. Every day that he doesn't get massive evidence or a win in Georgia or Arizona, then the American public shrugs and says, I guess Biden is president.
Does President Donald Trump have a path to a second term? What would it take? And in this last election cycle, how has what elections are all about fundamentally changed? In this episode, we sit down with classicist, historian, and Hoover Institution Senior Fellow Victor Davis Hanson. This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Victor Davis Hanson, such a pleasure to have you back on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you for having me.
So Victor, there's a huge question on a number of people's minds in America today, not everybody's, possibly about half the nation. Has the fate of the presidency actually been decided already? Is everything fait accompli?
Well, I think in the computer age, in the age of Silicon Valley, we've created this new pseudoscientific accuracy. So in the old days, maybe 20, 30 years ago, they had something called exit polls. So people people lied as much to exit pollers as they did to regular pollers. But nevertheless, they would call elections based on what people in particular demographics said as they exited the polls. And then they learned very quickly that was not very accurate. So they didn't really call, after getting it burned a few times, especially in 76 and 80, they didn't really call until 30 or 40%. Then the computer age came, and they said they had these sophisticated data on age, gender, income, and they began calling them, and they started that. And then we had something like the Nate Silver phenomenon at 538, where these gurus, then almost to the decibel point, claimed they could call an election either by the poll before the election or on election night. And that crashed and burned in 2016. It was discredited this time around. But nonetheless, there's so many people invested into that methodology that we saw on Fox. Not only did Fox, take one example, call Arizona when it was still close and is still close as we were filming this, but they didn't call Florida and they didn't call Texas. And that created a mythology or narrative that night that whatever Donald Trump might do to question the voting sanctity later on, it didn't really matter because he'd lost his bastion in Florida and Texas perhaps, and for sure in Barry Goldwater's Arizona. And then remember that Fox News and CNN and all of the networks said that the Republicans were going to lose, the Democrats were going to gain at least 5 seats so that their margin would widen. So there was a sense very early on in the evening that something had gone terribly wrong for the Trump campaign. The Senate was lost. The House was even more lost than it had been before, and Joe Biden was president. And that all of that turned out to be either untrue or not proven to this moment.
Well, so what are people supposed to believe today? I mean, we're having a kind of a foundational question here, right?
Yeah, we are. It's kind of an ancient question between your sensory perception, your common sense, your gut instinct, and what elites tell you. So most people have certain age-old benchmarks when they drive down the street and they think it's pretty diverse. They count signs. When they look at campaigns, they see one candidate in a basement and one crisscrossing the country. When they see rallies, they see one with 40,000 people and one with nothing. And they remember that's how we knew Harry Truman was going to beat Tom Dewey and that the Gallup poll was wrong. But so it's an age-old distrust of the pollsters, but that's a benign interpretation. A cynical interpretation says that in this new era where we've ended election day as a tradition, where 85% of the vote in some states is mail-in or it's early voting, and that decision will be made by millions of voters before the third debate, for example, or before the Hunter Biden scandal. And how will it be made? On what criteria? If people are tuning out the last 2 or 3 weeks of the really important part of a campaign where a candidate either melts or gets emboldened? And the answer is polls. So polls have become a very potent political weapon because they tell the voter in, let's say, first week in October, I wouldn't raise money when Trump's down 17 in Wisconsin. Why would you go out and vote when CNN says he's going to lose the popular vote by 12? Going to knock door to door when YouGov says that Trump has already lost, he's going to lose by 385 votes. 385 votes Biden's going to get in the Electoral College. So they're very potent use of a partisan tool. And when you combine that with this huge 21st century money made in Wall Street and Silicon Valley, the Bloomberg fortune, the Zuckerberg fortune, the Apple fortune, the Google fortune, combined it with the power, the invasive power of Silicon Valley to cancel people, deplatform them, block ads, censor news, reorder the order of a Google search. Add that with his huge fortune. Michael Bloomberg, 50 million in Ohio, maybe 100 million into Florida, 100 million spent against Lindsey Graham. You've got a whole new dynamic that, you know, we haven't really grasped the contours. The Republicans surely haven't. They had the election won on election. Get out the vote, put a sign on your yard, go to a rally. Yeah, this is what we do. And the Democrats just said, no, we have a virtual candidate. He's a shill for a hard left progressive agenda. The media's on board. They're going to have scripted questions to him. He's going to be teleprompting his answers. Any gaffe will be contextualized or blacked out on media. We'll censor any ad that we find effective on the part of the Trump. And then for 25 days, 30 days, 45 days before the election, we will be getting people out to vote, mail registration, and the ballot can be mailed the same day as they were registered. And we'll get out, we'll have third-party vote harvesters, blanket community. So it's a whole new concept of an election, and it's very dangerous, and we're going to see it. We haven't seen anything in Georgia until like this, what's going to happen on January 5th, and since Sherman marched through Georgia. There's going to be a big march through Georgia, but it's going to be Silicon Valley money and Bloomberg money and leftist and computer data analytics and pollsters. It's going to be a nightmare because the fate of the country will hinge on those two elections. And we've never seen two elections in 1 year in one state, and runoff elections at that, and then the Senate that hinges on the decision in this one state. And the decision is not whether, you know, a moderate Republican or a moderate Democrat will switch chairs. It's whether a hard left majority will end the filibuster and with it pack the court or get rid of the Electoral College, and on and on.
You know, I actually want to talk a little bit about Georgia and the significance of the hand count that's now been, I guess, authorized or arranged. But before I go there, you've talked a little bit before about, you know, this sort of fundamental change in how the elections are run, and it's something about how fundamentally people are basically, in a traditional sense, would have to actively go out to vote. They would have to go and actually do something themselves, as opposed to someone coming to their door and collecting, so to speak, or harvesting, to use that term. And this is just, again, a sort of a foundational shift of sorts. And I want you to dig into that a little bit more for me, please.
Yeah, we've reversed the concept of what it was to be an American. The founders' vision is we can capture it in the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, the writings of everybody from Hamilton to Jefferson, diverse as they were, was that we were, Tocqueville talked about, we were rugged individuals. We were autonomous citizens. We owned property most of the time. And we took it upon ourselves to guarantee our rights, which could always be taken away, with responsibilities to get out and vote, to inform yourself about the issues. And we just assumed that not everybody would do that. And if they didn't do it, it's a free country. Live and let live. You don't want to go to the polls? Don't go to the polls. You don't want to look up at the issues? You just want to vote what somebody tells you. We had parameters. You can't pay a person to vote, or you can't block them. And when we tried on the basis of race or gender, we amended those contortions. But now what it is, that is racist, that is class bias, And we have to bring out the voter from the woodwork. We're not going to ask anything of the voter. So this was the next stage of the last 20 years. We're going to say to the voter, there's no such thing as an absentee ballot. There's a mail-in ballot. You don't have to be sick. You don't have to miss work. Just mail it in, and maybe then you won't suffer so much hardship by going to the polls, or you won't get dirty looks that will bother you. And then we've gone to the next stage after that is we will come to your home. We will present you with a registration form that you may not have gotten. We will have you fill it out. We will take it to the registrar. We'll be back the next day with a hand-delivered ballot, or we will tell you how to vote. Then we will take that ballot and we will hand it to you. And if you still are confused and you still would be so stubborn as that you wanted to vote, here are the polls. We'll give you the polls, and we'll not just say Biden by 5. We'll say Biden has a 78.7 chance to win the election after we, Nate Silver and 538, have run it through 400,000 computer simulations. And so that's what we're doing. And then so we have a proverbial voter just back on the couch that says, well, what do you want me to do? Where do I put my X? And that's where we are. And that's considered fairer because we've taken every obstacle and every labor away from voting, as that reveals a true America. So we have two visions. The founders was the true American is the person that takes the initiative. And when he doesn't take the initiative, he doesn't get the result he likes, he will take the initiatives at some point. Otherwise, he's not going to be a participant, and he won't get a government that he thinks if he's in the majority, deserve. Or if he's in the minority, he won't get minority protection under democracy. But we've got away with that. The real American is under that veneer. We've got to bring him out and discover him and pamper him and massage him to vote in a way that we, the elite, think is in his interest. It's a very different concept.
Victor, as you're speaking, it just strikes me that this whole kind of approach, doesn't it make it so that the group that has the better machine, so to speak, or more money pumped into that machine wins? Is that's what strikes me here.
Yeah, that is bothersome, but of course that was always used against the Republicans, the dark Koch brothers money. I don't think the word dark money exists anymore because it's all on the left side, and they dropped it just as they dropped the phrase absentee ballot. So we know from the history of America what happens when huge amounts of money flow into a particular campaign, and the advertising and the warping of reality. But that's nothing compared to this postmodernism. We've never had this before, where you have pollsters who do all of these analytics, and then they, in concert, create a narrative that one candidate has no chance to win, when they know their methodology is flawed, because it's flawed from the record of 2016, and they know it's flawed. And yet they feel that the poll is not to reflect public opinion, but to change it in a predetermined way. That's new. But even more disturbing is that Silicon Valley, as we're speaking right now, they're adjudicating which type of ad will be on social media. And when Facebook has about 50% of the world, 7 billion population plus world, social media, and Twitter has about a 90% monopoly on its particular shortened version of social media, and when Google controls 90% of all the Google searches, then you can really distort reality. You know, you can say Hunter Biden and do a Google search, and you might not find for 4 pages that he did anything wrong. It would probably be right-wing conspiracy to hurt the Biden family, story after story after story. And that's what we're up against. It's Orwellian, and I don't know where it's going to end, but when you combine that with the administrative's sudden shift in time of a national pandemic and quarantine, to suddenly say after 233 years of American tradition, oh, by the way, there is no more election day supremacy anymore. It's called mail-in ballot. We have a new word called mail-in and early voting, and this is what we're going to do. And it proved to be very conducive to the internet, Silicon Valley, and the use of money. And it was sort of a perfect storm, and I think the Republicans and conservatives had no idea. I know I didn't. I thought that maybe it would be difficult to turn in a mail-in ballot for somebody who'd never done it before, and I thought by scaring everybody that we were living in the age of the bubonic plague, maybe they had scared away their own voters from the polls. We were all right about that. They did, but it didn't matter, because even if you didn't know how to fill out a mail-in ballot, there were resources available to you that you didn't have to. Somebody could come to your home and do it for you. So this is brave new world we're in.
I have to ask you this again before we sort of move on to Georgia and some other questions about prospective fraud, if this is going to actually be an issue. Is Trump actually being used as a kind of Emmanuel Goldstein here? This is just something that struck me today, frankly.
Yeah, I've written a couple columns about that. You know, the 3 minutes of hate of Donald Trump. I don't know what these cable news stations and columnists are going to do now, because we know that they called George W. Bush a Nazi and Mussolini, and Bush didn't really fight back, so it was kind of a boring topic. Michael Moore, Cindy Sheehan out of our past, but Trump fought back, and so he made it into a gladiatorial contest, and they were the spectators with their thumbs up or down. They loved it, and I mean, from the first, right after the election, which is very ironic because they're worried. The Democrats are saying we're worried about the integrity of election, and all sides have to assume responsibility to accept the will of the people, but that's Orwellian, because in 2016 they almost immediately had Jill Stein on their behalf sue 3 states, the key states, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, to recount and say that voting machines were Russian collusion. Remember that they were tampered with. They weren't. And then we had the electors who were not supposed to vote as their individual state mandates dictated, and we had celebrities, and then we had, you know, blow up the White House with Madonna and all those protests on Inauguration Day, and then we went right into Mueller and Russian collusion, 25th Amendment, emoluments clause, Michael Cohen, impeachment, Ukraine. So, yeah, I'm really worried, because no president had ever been so systematically attacked like that. And no president had ever fought so fiercely in return. And we'll see what happens, but the media, Donald Trump was some kind of, I don't know what the word is, talesman, or he was some type of touchstone where anything that he got near revealed the true essence of what we all suspected, but we knew that they would never be revealed. He was a cipher, and by that I mean, we knew that the media was biased, but we never thought Jim Rutenberg or the New York Times or Christiane Amanpour would say, yes, we are biased, and we're biased because we have to stop Donald Trump. Or we all thought that Anderson Cooper was kind of a fraud, but we never thought on air he'd say, why don't you just crap on your desk? He didn't use that word. Or we never thought people, you know, right on the air would say, hands up, don't shoot. That fraud that we know Eric Holder's Justice Department proved was wrong in Ferguson. So he brought people out to say and do things that we've never seen before. James Comey is absolutely stark raving mad right now. And he wasn't. I mean, he was always a dubious character, so was John Brennan, but my God, they've reduced themselves to caricatures. Hillary Clinton was always suspect, but my gosh, when she said, I'm going to join the resistance, and I was cheated, and Donald Trump, we should never concede the election. We've seen a new dimension of reality that Donald Trump brought about. He really tore off the curtain and said, these guys have these little gears, and that Oz thing on the screen is just completely false. They're little, tiny, mean-spirited people. That was pretty effective. I don't know if he meant to do that, but he got them so obsessed that they became entirely unhinged.
Well, you know,